It all began to unravel after 3.5 years of what I thought was a solid marriage. At first, the signs were subtle, almost easy to dismiss. My wife, Kathy, started coming home later and later from work, often claiming she had team dinners or networking events. I tried to brush it off, telling myself she was just climbing the corporate ladder, paying her dues. But deep down, something felt off. The intimacy between us had dwindled to almost nothing. Every time I tried to initiate anything, she'd push me away, citing exhaustion or stress. It was a slow, painful erosion of our connection, and it gnawed at me more than I cared to admit. Then came the day that shattered any remaining illusions. It was a seemingly ordinary evening. Kathy had asked me to help her carry groceries from her car. As I reached into the back seat, something caught my eye, a flash of pink tucked under the front passenger seat. My stomach dropped as I pulled it out. It was her bra, one from her favorite lingerie store. My mind raced. Why was it there? She always took her bra off first when she got home, especially when she was feeling amorous. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. My hands trembled as I tried to make sense of it. Was this a sign? A mistake? Or something far worse? I didn't confront her right away. Instead, I buried the suspicion, hoping I was wrong. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it grew like a weed, choking out any peace I had left. I started noticing other things, her sudden defensiveness when I asked about her late nights. The way she'd snap at me over the smallest things. She even started using our spare bedroom as a home office, spending hours in there with the door closed. I told myself it was just work stress, but the nagging feeling wouldn't go away. Then, one Friday night, I decided to test the waters. I cooked her favorite meal, set the table with candles, and even bought a bottle of wine. When she came home, I expected her to be touched, maybe even remorseful for how distant she'd been. Instead, she breezed in, barely glanced at the effort I'd made, and announced she was going out with coworkers. My heart sank. I asked if she could stay just this once, but she brushed me off, saying it was important for her career. That's when I knew something was terribly wrong. The bra, the late nights, the coldness sit all pointed to one devastating truth. My wife was having an affair, and I was about to find out just how deep the betrayal went. The suspicion that had been gnawing at me for weeks finally reached a breaking point. I couldn't ignore the signs any longer, the late nights, the emotional distance, and that damn bra I found in her car. My mind was a battlefield of doubt and denial, but I knew I had to face the truth, no matter how painful it might be. So I made a decision that would change everything. I would follow her. It wasn't something I ever imagined doing, but the weight of uncertainty was crushing me. I had to know. That Friday night, after she brushed off my attempt at a romantic dinner, I waited until she left for her work outing. My hands were shaking as I grabbed my work phone and discreetly slipped it into the backseat of her car before she drove off. I felt like a stranger in my own life, reduced to spying on the woman I had vowed to trust forever. But I had no choice. I needed answers. I followed her from a distance, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. She drove to a bar downtown, one she often mentioned going to with her coworkers. I parked across the street, my stomach in knots as I watched her walk inside. Minutes turned into hours, and the longer I sat there, the more my anxiety grew. Finally, I saw her emerge from the bar, but she wasn't alone. A man, dressed in a sharp suit, walked out with her. My breath hitched as I watched him pull her close, his hand resting on her waist. Then, as if to twist the knife deeper, he kissed her. Right there, in the open, like it was the most natural thing in the world. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. My vision blurred, and my hands clenched the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. But the worst was yet to come. They got into his car and drove off. I followed, my heart racing, my mind screaming at me to turn back. But I couldn't. I had to see it through. 10 minutes later, they pulled into the parking lot of a hotel. I watched in stunned silence as they walked inside, hand in hand, like a couple deeply in love. I sat there in my car, paralyzed by the weight of what I'd just witnessed. The woman I had loved, trusted, and built a life with had betrayed me in the most intimate way possible. The realization hit me like a tidal wave, drowning me in a sea of anger, pain, and humiliation. I pounded the steering wheel, screaming into the void, but no amount of rage could erase the image of her with him. My marriage was over, and I was left to pick up the shattered pieces of my life. That night, I drove away, not knowing where I was going, only that I could never go back to the life I once had. After the devastating night of confirming Kathy's affair, I felt like a ghost in my own life. The image of her with that man haunted me, replaying in my mind like a cruel loop. I couldn't stay in that apartment, surrounded by the remnants of a marriage built on lies. Every corner of our home felt tainted, every memory poisoned. I knew I had to leave, not just for my sanity, but for my survival. The thought of confronting her, of screaming and demanding answers, crossed my mind, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. She didn't deserve my anger or my tears. She didn't deserve anything from me anymore. I began planning my escape in secret, like a prisoner plotting a breakout. While Kathy was at work, I quietly packed my belongings, clothes, my laptop, a few personal items. I left behind everything that reminded me of us, the wedding photos, the shared furniture, even the dishes we'd picked out together. It was as if I was shedding a skin, leaving behind the man I used to be. I didn't tell her where I was going or why. I simply left a note on the kitchen table, short and to the point. I hope it was worth it. I placed my wedding ring on top of it, a final symbol of the life I was walking away from. My destination was a trailer on a hillside, a place I'd found through a chance encounter with a man named Ree at a bar. It was small, rustic, and far from the life I'd known, but it offered something I desperately needed: freedom. As I drove away from the city, the weight of betrayal began to lift, replaced by a strange sense of relief. The mountains welcomed me with open arms, their quiet beauty a stark contrast to the chaos I'd left behind. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. This wasn't just a new chapter, it was a new beginning. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. Life in the trailer on the hillside was a stark contrast to the chaos I'd left behind. At first, the silence was deafening, a constant reminder of the life I'd walked away from. But slowly, I began to find solace in the simplicity of my new surroundings. The mountains became my sanctuary, their rugged beauty a balm to my wounded soul. I started running again, something I hadn't done in years. The rhythm of my feet hitting the dirt trails, the crisp air filling my lungs, was therapeutic. Each step felt like I was putting distance between myself and the pain of Kathy's betrayal. Ree, the man who'd offered me the trailer, became an unexpected source of support. His easygoing nature and no-nonsense advice helped ground me. Through him, I met a small circle of people who didn't know my past and didn't care to ask. They accepted me for who I was, not who I'd been. We'd gather at a local bar, sharing stories and laughter. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I belonged somewhere. But the real turning point came when I met Sarah. It was a chance encounter on one of my runs. She was struggling to change a flat tire on the side of the road, and I stopped to help. There was something about her, her warmth, her smile that instantly put me at ease. We struck up a conversation, and before I knew it, we were meeting for coffee, then hikes, then dinners. She was younger than me, full of life and optimism, and she saw me in a way Kathy never had. With her, I didn't feel like the broken man who'd been betrayed. I felt seen, valued, and slowly I began to believe in love again. Of course, it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were moments when the ghosts of my past would resurface a song on the radio. A fleeting memory, and I'd feel that familiar ache in my chest. But Sarah was patient, never pushing me to open up before I was ready. She became my anchor, helping me navigate the stormy waters of my emotions. As the months passed, I realized I was no longer just surviving. The trailer, once a symbol of escape, had become a home. The mountains, once a refuge, were now my playground. And Sarah, once a stranger, was becoming someone I could imagine building a future with. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was a life I was proud of. For the first time in years, I felt free, not just from Kathy, but from the weight of my own expectations. I was finally living for myself, and it was more than enough. Just when I thought I had finally moved on, the past came crashing back into my life like an unwelcome storm. It had been over a year since I'd left Kathy, a year of rebuilding, healing, and finding peace in my new life. But one day, as I sat in a coffee shop in town, I heard a voice call my name. I turned, and there she was, Kathy, standing across the street, waving at me like no time had passed. My stomach churned as she hurried over, her face a mix of desperation and hope. It was as if the universe had decided to test me, to see if I was truly as strong as I thought I was. She looked different, thinner, more tired, her once polished demeanor replaced by a nervous energy. She asked if we could talk, and against my better judgment, I agreed. We found a bench, and she began to spill her story. Her voice trembled as she confessed that karma had caught up with her. Her affair had been exposed at work, and the fallout was catastrophic. She'd lost her job, her reputation was in tatters. And her affair partner, the man I'd seen her with that night, had turned on her, blaming her for everything. His had left him, and he'd been transferred to another department, leaving Kathy to face the consequences alone. As she spoke, I could see the weight of her guilt crushing her. She admitted that she'd ended the affair immediately after I left, but it was too late. The damage was done. She'd spent the past year trying to find me, desperate to apologize and make amends. She claimed she'd been consumed by regret. That she'd realized too late how much she'd loved me and how deeply she'd hurt me. Her words were laced with pain, but I couldn't tell if it was genuine remorse or just the fallout of her life falling apart. She begged for a second chance, her voice breaking as she pleaded for forgiveness. She even suggested we could start over, somewhere new, away from the mess she'd created. But as I listened, I felt nothing but numbness. The anger, the hurt, the betrayal was all still there, but it no longer controlled me. I had moved on, and nothing she said could change that. When she finally stopped talking, I looked her in the eye and told her the truth. You had your chance, and you threw it away. I've built a new life, one that doesn't include you. Her face crumpled, but I felt no satisfaction, only relief. The past was behind me, and I wasn't going back. Kathy's plea for reconciliation hung in the air like a storm cloud, heavy and suffocating. She sat across from me, her eyes pleading, her voice trembling as she poured out her regrets and apologies. She spoke of how much she had lost her job, her reputation, even her affair partner, who had turned on her when the truth came to light. She claimed she had changed, that she had spent the past year reflecting on her mistakes and realizing how much she still loved me. But as I listened, I felt nothing but a cold, unyielding resolve. The man she was begging for forgiveness no longer existed. He had been shattered the night I watched her walk into that hotel with another man, and the pieces had been rebuilt into someone stronger, someone who refused to be broken again. I looked her in the eye, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside me. You had your chance, I said, each word deliberate and final. You chose to throw away everything we had for a fleeting moment of selfishness. You don't get to come back now and ask for a second chance. Her face crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks, but I felt no pity. The betrayal had cut too deep. the scars too permanent. I had spent months rebuilding my life, finding peace in the mountains, and even opening my heart to someone new. I wasn't about to let her drag me back into the chaos she had created. She tried to argue, to convince me that we could start over, that we could move to a new city and leave the past behind. But I shut her down. "You don't get to rewrite history," I said. "What you did wasn't a mistake, it was a choice. And choices have consequences." I stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. She reached for my hand, but I pulled away, the touch feeling foreign and unwelcome. "I hope you find happiness," I told her, my tone firm but not unkind. "But it won't be with me." As I walked away, I felt a strange sense of liberation. The weight of her betrayal no longer had power over me. I had built a new life, one filled with simplicity, peace, and the possibility of love with someone who valued me. Kathy's tears and apologies couldn't undo the damage she had done, and I refused to let her guilt dictate my future. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly free. The past was behind me, and I was moving forward alone, but unbroken. Looking back on everything, the betrayal, the heartbreak, the journey to rebuild my life, I've come to realize that the most powerful lesson I've learned is the importance of letting go. Holding on to the past, to the pain and anger, only chains you to a version of yourself that no longer exists. When I left Kathy, I didn't just walk away from her. I walked away from the person I had become in that marriage, a man who had lost himself in the shadow of someone else's lies. It wasn't easy. There were nights I lay awake, replaying every moment, every mistake, every betrayal. But with time, I learned to focus on myself, to find joy in the simple things, and to rebuild my life on my own terms. To anyone reading this, if you've been through something similar, know this: you don't have to carry the weight of someone else's mistakes. Betrayal doesn't define you. What defines you is how you rise from it. Letting go isn't about forgetting. It's about choosing yourself, your peace, and your future. Surround yourself with people who lift you up, who remind you of your worth. And most importantly, don't be afraid to start over. Life is too short to be spent in the shadow of someone else's choices. Take it from me, the other side of pain is freedom, and it's worth fighting for. In my final update, I can finally say that the chapter with Kathy has been closed for good. After months of sporadic emails and desperate attempts to reconnect, she finally accepted that I wasn't coming back. She revealed that she had taken a job offer in another state, a move she claimed was for a fresh start. But I knew better, which was her way of running from the mess she had created. Part of me wondered if she hoped I'd follow, that I'd drop everything and chase after her like some romantic fool. But I wasn't that man anymore. I had built a life I was proud of, one that didn't include her. Her departure brought an unexpected sense of relief. The weight of her presence, even from a distance, had been a constant reminder of the pain she'd caused. But now, with her gone, I felt truly free. My life in the mountains had become everything I needed: peaceful, simple, and fulfilling. I had my trailer, my routines, and the company of good friends like Ree. I'd even started seeing someone new, a woman who made me laugh and reminded me that love didn't have to come with betrayal. Kathy's final email was a mix of apologies and regrets, but it didn't stir anything in me. I responded briefly, wishing her well, but making it clear that I had no intention of rekindling anything. She was part of my past, and I was focused on my future. As I sit here now, looking out at the mountains, I feel a deep sense of gratitude. I've found peace, happiness, and a life that's entirely my own. And for the first time in a long time, I know I'm exactly where I'm meant to be.